A single envelope arrived at the White House, one among thousands. It wasn't from a senator, a general, or a high-profile lobbyist. It came from a 29-year-old Air Force lieutenant, a name unknown in Washington. At first, President Donald Trump barely gave it a glance, but then he read the first line. Mr. President, I have something important to say, not for myself, but for those who can no longer speak. Something about those words made him pause. Young officers don't write directly to the president. They don't ask for private meetings unless they know something that the world isn't supposed to hear. Trump looked up at his advisors. Who is this Daniel Pierce? And what the hell does he know? What started as a simple letter was about to shake the nation to its core. Daniel Pierce had faced danger before. He had been trained for it. Combat zones, high-pressure missions, life or death decisions. Those were battles he understood. But this was different. As he stepped off the military transport jet at Joint Base Andrews, his uniform was crisp, but his hands were clenched into fists. The air was thick with tension. Though no one had spoken a word to him, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes, watching, assessing, waiting. No press had been notified of his arrival, yet whispers had begun. Soldiers passing by stole quick glances. A few officers murmured among themselves as they saw him approach the waiting black SUV. Daniel ignored them. He had spent years learning how to tune out distractions, but deep down, he knew this wasn't something he could push aside. As the vehicle pulled away, his mind replayed the decision that had led him here. The letter, the risks, the choice to break the silence. He wasn't here to make friends. He wasn't here for revenge. He was here for the truth. The SUV moved swiftly through the streets of Washington, weaving through traffic as the White House loomed ahead. By the time they reached the gates, his pulse had settled, not out of fear, but out of focus. A Marine opened the door for him. Lieutenant Pierce, right this way. He was escorted through the halls, past security checkpoints, past portraits of leaders who had shaped the country's history. Finally, he was led into a waiting room just outside the Oval Office. A man in a sharp suit stood near the door, arms crossed. His gaze was unreadable, but his scrutiny was clear. Lieutenant Pierce, he said, his voice even but firm, before you go in there, I need to make one thing clear. Daniel met his gaze without hesitation. You are stepping into the most powerful room in the world. Every word you say, every move you make, it will be remembered. If you're here to make accusations, you'd better have something stronger than theories. Daniel didn't blink. I have the truth. The man studied him for another moment, then finally nodded and stepped aside. The door opened, and Daniel Pierce stepped into the room that could change everything. President Donald Trump stood near his desk, hands in his pockets, watching as Daniel entered. The room was grand, yet intimate, a place where decisions that shaped the world were made. Daniel had never cared for politics. He had spent his life following orders, trusting in the system. But now, standing before the commander-in-chief, he realized something that made his stomach turn. He wasn't sure if he could trust anyone anymore. Trump gestured to the chair in front of him. Have a seat, Lieutenant. Daniel sat, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He had faced ranking officers before, but this was different. Trump studied him for a moment before speaking again. Your letter caught my attention, he said, leaning forward slightly. Not because of what you asked, but because of how you asked. You didn't come to complain. You didn't beg for justice. You simply said, I have something to say. Daniel held his gaze. Yes, sir. Trump tapped his fingers on the desk. So tell me, what is it that's so important? Daniel took a slow breath. He had played this conversation over in his mind 1,000 times. He had imagined every possible outcome. But now, as he sat across from the most powerful man in the country, he knew no rehearsed speech would do this justice. He had to speak the truth. 3 years ago, I led a mission, he began, his voice steady. A classified operation overseas. On paper, it was supposed to be routine, but something went wrong. Trump's expression didn't change, but Daniel could tell he was listening carefully. My best friend, Captain Mark Bennett, trusted my call, and he died because of it. The words came out flat, controlled, but inside the weight of them crushed him. For 3 years I carried that. I believed it was my fault. I told myself I should have made a different decision. Daniel swallowed hard. But I was wrong. Trump narrowed his eyes slightly. Wrong how? Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Here it was, the moment of no return. The mission wasn't a mistake. It was a setup, he said. We were sent in with bad intelligence. The higher-ups knew the risks, and they sent us in anyway. For the first time, Trump's expression shifted slightly. Daniel pushed forward. When everything fell apart, they needed someone to blame, someone to take the fall. So they buried the truth, and they let me carry the weight of it. Silence filled the room. Trump leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his chin. His gaze flickered toward the military advisor standing by the bookshelf. General Dawson? The older man's expression was unreadable, but Daniel could feel the tension in his stance. Finally, Trump spoke. That's a big claim, Lieutenant. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir, and I have proof. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. He set it on the desk, directly in front of the President of the United States. Trump didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached forward and picked it up. You're telling me, he said, his voice quieter now, that there's a cover-up happening within my own military? Daniel met his gaze, unflinching. Yes, sir. Trump studied him carefully. The weight of the moment hung between them. Then after what felt like an eternity, the president sat back in his chair and exhaled. He turned to General Dawson. Well, the general's jaw tightened. This is a dangerous road, Mr. President. If he's wrong, this could destabilize military trust. If he's right, his voice trailed off. Trump looked back at Daniel. And what do you want from me? Daniel's voice was unwavering. I don't want revenge. I don't want favors. I just want the truth to be heard. Trump was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, Lieutenant, he said. You wanted to be heard? Let's make sure the whole damn country listens. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. Trump had just given him the biggest platform in the world, and now there was no turning back.